Winning comment. Also, I'm glad that so many of you are into whale menopause. So today we'll go over the major hypotheses about menopause and why it occurs in humans and whales. Also, I was so impressed that so many of you commented and said, what about this explanation? And I could say, there's a name for that hypothesis. And here they are. We'll start with the grandmother hypothesis that we covered yesterday, which is where menopause occurs so that the female can pour more energy into her existing kids and into her grandkids, but we'll add more data because it turns out this is especially important in times of starvation. For instance, in orcas, during times of famine, it is the elderly females who tend to lead the pack. And also, demographic data shows that if you don't have a grandmother during these times of starvation, that is linked to increased mortality. In human historical data, the longer a woman has post-reproductive time, the more reproductive success of her grandchildren and the greater their survival rate. Though one study shows that true only for maternal grandmothers and not for paternal grandmothers, perhaps because of paternity uncertainty. And also from other data, we know that maternal grandmothers tend to focus on offspring survival, while paternal grandmothers tend to focus on increased birth rate. Then there's the mother hypothesis, and that's the idea that because there's an increased reproductive risk as you age, it's better to stop having kids and to focus on the kids you have and make sure that they thrive. Then there's the reproductive conflict hypothesis, or the competition hypothesis, which is the idea that there's only food for so many babies, and the grandmothers stop having it so that their babies don't compete with their kids' babies and make a worse reproductive success for both of them. There is data from pre-industrial Finland where overlapping mother-daughter births leads to less offspring survival, and you actually see the same thing in orca populations as well. Then one that's not on this list is the cultural transmission hypothesis, which is the idea that there's so much knowledge wrapped up in the head of these elderly females that it's just so important for the entire group that they're around to share these things that they know about routes to food and ways to escape danger. And as someone who thinks that the ideal form of government is a council of grandmas, this one makes a lot of sense to me. Now we'll stop here and ask one question. You might be wondering, why isn't this happening in more animals, such as elephants that also have big brains and are at the top of their food chain? And the answer might be that notice that these first four hypotheses kind of seem like variations of each other, as they might complement each other. And perhaps with the life history of the environment that elephants are in, three of these hypotheses might be true for them, but not the last one. And so there wasn't enough evolutionary force to push them over into this menopause system, and instead it's good for them to be reproductive all the time. But it's why all of this evolution stuff is so interesting, because there's so many pushes and pulls going on. Another theory is called the non-adaptation hypothesis, or here it's called the lifespan artifact hypothesis. And it's the idea that humans and some species of whales have a much longer lifespan in a rather short period of time all of a sudden, and that simply the reproductive system hasn't caught up. This may have also been a neutral trait that really didn't affect how much of your genes were passed on, and then it just turned out to be a useful thing, so evolution kept it around. That being said, it does appear like the data suggests that senescence, or aging out of functionality, is programmed into the genes around this. So we're actually supposed to stop then, and not that it just happens to run out. The patriarch hypothesis can also be called the young female hypothesis, and it's the idea that males would lean towards younger females because of more reproductive success, and so older females would acquire genes that lead towards infertility, and they wouldn't have a penalty in terms of overall babies, so it's not going to affect how many genes are being passed on. Then there's a more straightforward evolutionary trade-off hypothesis, and it's the idea that your future production of children versus your survival of their offspring, it's better to stop making babies at a certain point. Then the last one that's intriguing to me is male-based philopatry, which is where the male leaves the group to go mate outside, and so then all the females that stay are going to be a more related clan. This is like a simpler version of what you see in bees, where every bee is a sister to the queen bee, and so all of them are so related that helping everybody obviously helps you pass on your genes through your sister, the queen, which helped to get over Darwin's horror that ants and bees might be the thing that completely undoes his evolutionary theory. In whales, this means that the elderly female might not be the grandmother to everyone in the group, but she is probably the great aunt or the second cousin once removed to all the other females in the group, and helping them helps pass on some part of her genes as well. However, lots of animals have the system where the males leave to mate, and they haven't evolved into having menopause, so maybe it's only a contributor. There's the major theories. I didn't quite cover every single one here, but I think this video is long enough. The other thing I found fascinating in this research was the cultural differences in menopause and how much it changes, how it views, how it has onset, the physical manifestations of it. It's really fascinating subject as well.